Hi, Freddie. I'm back with chapter 11 from The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And I don't remember exactly where it was that we left off. Oh, yeah, they had just gotten a visit from Santa Claus, of all things. So they're in Narnia, which was a land of always winter and no Christmas. Well, they just got a big surprise from Santa Claus, right? Peter got a sword. Um, Susan got a dagger and also an elixir to help heal people. And then Lucy got something else. I don't remember exactly what it was that she got, but she got something too, which was everything to help um, when there becomes a war, when it's going to become a war, because they're actually going to come up against um, the the uh, the White Witch, and so they need that. Uh, so now in chapter 11, it is called Allison is Nearer. Edmund, meanwhile, had been having the most disappointing time. When the dwarf had gone to get the sleigh ready, he had expected that the witch would start being nice to him, as she had been in their last meeting. But she said nothing at all, and when at last Edmund plucked up his courage to say, "Please, your majesty, could I have some Turkish delight?" You said," she answered, silent. She she answered, "Silence, fool!" There is appeared to be a change in her mood, and said, as if to herself, "And yet it will not do to have the brat fainting on the way," and once more clapped her hands. Another dwarf appeared. "Bring the human creature food and drink," she said. The dwarf went away and presently returned, bringing an iron bowl with some water in it and an iron plate with a hunk of dry bread on it. He grinned in repulsive manner as he set them down on the floor beside Edmund and said, "Turkish delight for the little prince. Ha ha ha!" "Take it away," Edmund said sulkily. "I don't want dry bread." But the witch suddenly turned to him with such incredible expression on her face that he apologized and began to nibble on the bread, though it was so stale he could hardly get it down. "You may be glad enough for it before you taste bread again," said the witch. While was still chewing away, the first dwarf came back and announced that the sleigh was ready. The White Witch rose and went out, ordering Edmund to come with her. The snow was again falling as they came into the courtyard, but she took no notice of that and made Edmund sit beside her on the sleigh. But before they drove off, she called Marjoram, and he came bounding like an enormous dog to the side of the sleigh. "Take with you the swiftest of your wolves, and go at once to the house of the beavers," said the witch, "and kill whatever you find there. If they are already gone, then make all speed to the stone table. But do not be seen. Wait for me there in hiding. I, meanwhile, must go many miles to the west before I find a place where I can drive across the river. You may overtake those humans before they reach the stone table. You will know what to do if you find them." "I hear and obey, O Queen," growled the wolf, and immediately he shot away into the snow and darkness as quickly as a horse can gallop. In a few minutes he had called another wolf and was with him on the dam and sniffing at the beaver's house. But of course they found it empty. It would have been a dreadful thing for the beavers and the children if the night had remained fine, for the wolves would then have been able to follow their trail, and 10 to 1 would have overtaken them before they got to the cave. But now that the snow had begun again, the scent was cold, and even the footprints were covered up. Meanwhile, the dwarf whipped up the reindeer, and the witch and Edmund drove out under the archway and on and away into the darkness and the cold. It was a terrible journey for Edmund, who had no coat. Before they had been going a quarter of an hour, all in front of him was covered with snow. He soon stopped trying to shake it off, because it was quickly as he did that a new lot gathered. And he was so tired. Soon he was so wet to the skin, and oh, how miserable he was. It didn't look now as if the witch intended to make him a king. All the things he had said to himself, believed that she was good and kind, and that her side was really the right side, sounded to him silly now. He would have gotten anything to meet the others at this moment, even Peter. The only way to comfort himself now was to try to believe that the whole thing was a dream, and that he would wake up at any moment. And as they went on, hour after hour, it did come to seem like a dream. This lasted longer than I could describe, even if I wrote pages and pages about it. But I will skip on to the time when the snow had stopped and the morning had come, and they were racing along into the daylight. And still they went on and on, with no sound but the enormous swoosh of the snow and the crackling of the reindeer's harnesses. And then at the last, the queen's reindeer, the witch said, "What have we here? Stop!" And they did. How Edmund hoped she was going to say something about breakfast, but she had stopped for quite a different reason. A little way off at the foot of a tree sat a merry party, a squirrel and his wife, and their children, and two sentinels and dwarf, and an old dog fox, all on stools around the table. Edmund couldn't quite see what they were eating, but it smelled lovely, and there seemed to be decorations of holly, and it wasn't at all sure that he didn't see something like a plum pudding. At the moment when the sleigh stopped, the fox, who was obviously the oldest person present, had just risen to its feet, holding a glass in its right paw as if it was going to say something. But when the whole party saw the sleigh stopping, and who was in it, all the gaiety went out of their faces. The father squirrel stopped eating with his fork halfway to his mouth, and one of the squirrels stopped with its fork actually in its mouth, and the baby squirrel squeaked in terror. "What is the meaning of this?" asked the witch queen. Nobody answered. "Speak, vermin," she said again. "Or do you want my dwarf to find you a tongue with his whip?" That was the meaning of all the gaiety, this waste, this self-indulgence. Where did you get all these things? "Please, your majesty," said the fox, "we were given them, and if I might make so bold as to drink your majesty's very good health." "Who gave them to you?" said the witch. "Father Christmas," stammered the fox. "What?" roared the witch, springing from the sleigh and taking a few strides nearer to the terrified animals. "He has not been here. You can't have been here. How dare you? But no, say you have been lying, and you shall now be forgiven." At that moment, one of the young squirrels lost its head completely. He has. It squeaked barely its little spoon on the table, beating its little spoon on the table. Edmund saw the witch bite her lip uh, so that a drop of blood appeared on her white cheek. Then she raised her wand. "Oh, don't, please, don't," shouted Edmund. But even while he was shouting, she waved her wand, and instantly, where the merry party had been, there was only statues of creatures. One with its fork fixed forever halfway to the stone mouth, seated around a stone table on which there were stone plates and a stone plum pudding. "As for you," said the witch, giving Edmund a stunning blow on the face as she remounted the sleigh, let that teach you to ask favors for spies and traitors. Drive on." And Edmund, for the first time in this story, felt sorry for someone besides himself. It seemed so pitiful to think of those little stone figures sitting there all the silent days and all the silent nights, year after year, till the moss grew on them, and at last even their faces crumbled away. Now they were steadily racing on again, and soon Edmund noticed that the snow which splashed against them as they rushed through was much wetter than it had been all night. At the same time, he noticed that he was feeling much less cold. It was also becoming foggy. In fact, every minute it grew foggier and warmer, as the sleigh was not running nearly as well as it had been running up until now. At first he thought it was because the reindeer were tired, but soon he saw that that couldn't be the real reason. The sleigh jerked and skidded and kept on jolting as if it was struck against stones. And however the dwarf whipped the poor reindeer, the sleigh went slower and slower. There also seemed to be a curious noise all around them, but the noise of their driving and jolting, and the dwarfs shouting at the reindeer, prevented Edmund from hearing what it was, until suddenly the sleigh struck so fast that it wouldn't go on at all. When that happened, there was a moment of silence, and in that silence, Edmund could at least hear the other noises properly. A strange, sweet rustling, chattering noises, and yet not so strange, for he had heard it before, if only he could remember where. Then all at once he did remember. It was the noise of running water. All around them, though out of sight, there was streams, chattering, moaning, bubbling, splashing, and even, in the distance, roaring. And his heart gave a great leap, though he hardly knew why, when he realized that the frost was over, and how near there was to a drip, drip, drip from the branches of all the trees. And then he looked at one tree and saw a great load of snow slide off it, and for the first time since he had entered Narnia, he saw a dark green of a fir tree. But he hadn't time to listen or watch any longer, for the witch said, "Don't sit there staring, fool. Get up and help." And, of course, Edmund had to obey. He stepped out into the snow, but it was really only slush by now, and began helping the dwarf to get the sleigh out of the muddy hole it had got into. He got it out in the end, and by being very cruel to the reindeer, the dwarf managed to get out of the move again, and they drove a little further, and now the snow was already melting in earnest, and patches of green grass were beginning to appear in every direction. Unless you have looked at the world of snow as long as Edmund had been looking at it, you hardly be able to imagine the relief of the green patches were after the endless white when the sleigh stopped again. "It's no good, your majesty," said the dwarf. "We can't sleigh in this thaw." "Then we must walk," said the witch. "We shall never overtake them walking," growled the dwarf. But with the start they got, not with the start that they got. "Are you my counselor or my slave?" said the witch. "Do as you are told. Tie the hands of the human creature behind it and keep hold at the end of the rope. And take your whip and cut the harshness of the harnesses of the reindeer. They'll find their way home." The dwarf obeyed, and with a few minutes Edmund found himself being forced to walk as fast as he could with his hands tied behind him. He kept on slipping in the slush and mud and wet grass, and every time he slipped the dwarf gave him a curse and sometimes a flick from the whip with the whip. The queen walked behind the dwarf and kept on yelling, "Faster! Faster!" Every moment the patches of green grew bigger and the patches of snow grew smaller. Every moment more and more of the trees shook off their robes of snow. Soon, wherever you looked, instead of white shapes you saw the dark green of ferns or the black prickiness branches of bare oaks and branches and elms, of birches and elms. Then the mist turned from white to gold and presently cleared away altogether. Shafts of delicious sunlight stroked down onto the forest floor, and overhead you could see the blue sky between the tree tops. Now there was more wonderful things happening. Coming suddenly around the corner into a glen of silver birch trees, Edmund saw the ground covered in all directions with little yellow flowers. The noise of the water grew louder. Presently they actually crossed the stream. Beyond it, they found snowdrops growing. Those are actually flowers. "Mind your own business," said the dwarf when he saw that Edmund had turned his head to look at them, and he gave the rope a jerk. But of course that didn't prevent Edmund from seeing. Only 5 minutes later he noticed a dozen crocuses growing around the foot of an old tree, gold and purple and white. Then came the sound even more delicious than the sound of water. Close beside the patch they were following, a bird suddenly chirped from the branch of a tree. It was answered by a chuckle. If that had been a sign that there was chattering and chirping in every direction, and then a moment of full song, and when within 5 minutes the whole woods was ringing with birds' music. And wherever Edmund's eyes turned, he saw birds alighting on branches or sailing overhead and chasing one another, or having their little quarrels, or tidying up their feathers with their beaks. "Faster, faster," said the witch. There was no truce for the fog now. There was no trace of the fog now. The sky became bluer and bluer, and now, where there was white clouds hurrying across it from time to time, in the wide glens there was primroses, and a light breeze sprung up, which scattered drops of moisture from the stay's branches, and carried cool, delicious scents against the faces of the travelers. The trees began to come fully alive, and the branches were covered with green and luminums with gold. Soon the birch trees had put forth their their delicate transparent leaves. As the travelers walked under them, the light always became green, and the bees buzzed across their path. "This is no thaw," said the dwarf, suddenly stopping. "This is spring. What are we to do? Your winters has been destroyed, I tell you. This is Alison's doing." "If either of you mention that name again," said the witch, "he shall instantly be killed." Okay, so that's the end of it.